June 16th, 1886. A calm yet foggy night on the Atlantic off the coast of Ushant. But within moments, peacefulness would give way to chaos. The mighty SS Drummond Castle, a veteran of the seas, was within a day of completing her journey to England. Yet, in just 4 short minutes, the ship would vanish beneath the waves, taking along with her 242 lives with nearly the entirety of her passengers and crew. What caused this sudden and devastating tragedy? Stay with us and find out. The SS Drummond Castle was no stranger to the seas. Built in 1881 in Glasgow, she was a symbol of the industrial age's triumphs. Powerful, elegant, and designed to bridge the British Empire's vast distances. At 365 feet long, and weighing 3,706 gross tons, she carried passengers and cargo between England and its vast array of colonies, for which it was said the sun never set upon them all. The castle served as a lifeline for travellers and goods alike. On May 28, 1896, she departed Cape Town with 143 ticket holders under the care of 102 crew aboard. A nearly 3-week journey across some of the world's most unpredictable waters. The ship was laden with cargo, nearly 2,000 bales of wool, skins and horns destined for London markets, as well as 250 tons of coal in her bunkers. For many travellers, this voyage was a return home. An end to adventures, work contracts, or colonial business in South Africa. But as the liner neared the coast of France on the evening of June 16th, something was amiss. The Front-Verse sword, infamous among sailors for its treacherous currents and hidden reefs, was veiled in drizzle and thick fog. Visibility was poor, the kind of night that demanded caution. Yet the vessel pressed on, maintaining full speed, unaware it was straying dangerously off course. The Drummond Castle was a day away from completing her journey. No one aboard could have imagined she would never see the shores of England. The waters around Ushant, a small island off the coast of Brittany, were no ordinary stretch of ocean. For centuries, sailors had spoken of the region in hushed tones. The currents were deceptive, the tides relentless, and the seabed a minefield of jagged rocks. The safest passage past Ushant lay to the north, away from the deadly Pierres Vertes reef. But on that fateful night, the Drummond Castle veered into the southern entrance of the Front-Verse Sound, a narrow and perilous channel where the Pierres Vertes lay in wait. It was a route few captains dared to take, especially in poor visibility. Captain William Pierce, a veteran mariner, had made a grave miscalculation. He had neither reduced speed nor ordered soundings to confirm their position. The tranquil seas were deceiving, masking the danger below. There were no breakers to warn the crew that the ship was drifting eastward, pulled by the invisible grip of the tide, headlong toward catastrophe. Below deck, passengers settled in for the evening. A concert in the saloon had ended hours earlier, and most had retired to their cabins, lulled by the gentle rhythm of the ocean. Among them were men and women from all walks of life, colonial officials, merchants, and families returning home. Unaware of the perilous course, they slept soundly, their dreams untroubled by the dangers outside. But the ocean, indifferent to human plans and ambitions, was about to remind everyone aboard the Drummond Castle of its raw and remorseless power. At 11 p.m., the stillness of the Atlantic shattered like glass. A thunderous crash tore through the ship, a sound so jarring that it seemed to split the night asunder. The Drummond Castle jolted violently, throwing passengers from their beds and sending plates, glasses and furniture tumbling across the saloon. Below deck, the sound of tearing metal roared like an unstoppable beast. A deep, guttural scream as the Piers Verte reef gouged a jagged wound into the boat's underbelly. Asleep in his cabin, we find our story's historical composite. A man typical of whom might be found aboard the doomed vessel on her final voyage. James Royston, a prospector returning to England after years chasing gold and diamonds in South Africa, was thrown from his bunk. He stumbled to his feet, clutching a leather satchel that held the last remnants of his mostly failed endeavours. A few rough diamonds, sketches of unclaimed land, and a notebook filled with unfulfilled dreams. Disoriented, his head spinning, he grabbed hold of a support beam as the transport groaned under its own weight. For a brief, fleeting moment, there was silence. A silence. A silence that felt impossibly heavy, as if the world were holding its breath. Then chaos erupted. Crew members screamed orders, their voices barely carrying above the shrieking of twisted steel and the thunder of seawater flooding into the lower compartments. Passengers poured into the corridors, clutching children, bags, and each other, their faces pale with terror. The ship tilted sharply to port, and a cascade of water spilled onto the deck, soaking those who had gained the outside. On the deck, the scene was one of pandemonium. She was listing sharply, and seawater was beginning to creep over the gunwales. Captain Pierce, believing the vessel was grounded, hesitated to order an evacuation. The lifeboats, already slung out in accordance with company policy, remained untouched. The vessel's lanterns flickered weakly in the misty darkness, casting eerie shadows across the heaving, rain-slicked deck. Crewmen dashed from one end to the other, their boots pounding on the wet planks as they tried desperately to assess the damage. Some shouted to the passengers, urging them to stay calm, but the terror in their own voices betrayed the truth. They had no time. From the bowels of the Drummond came a sickening, relentless roar as seawater surged through the torn hull, rushing into the engine room. The chief engineer, his face grim and streaked with soot, ordered his men to release the steam from the boilers, fearing a catastrophic explosion that would obliterate what little chance they had left. Even in the face of certain doom, their hands moved with mechanical precision. Their years of training overriding the panic clawing James stumbled across the deck, his heart hammering harder than it had the day he had wrestled his first diamond from the South African countryside. The leather satchel with that gem now lay dropped on the planking, trampled by many, the prospector not realizing he had even dropped it, as survival was the only thing on his mind now. He pushed his way through the crowd, gripping the railing as the ship lurched again, the deck tilting sharply beneath his feet. Around him, passengers screamed, their voices blending into a din of fear and confusion. The smell of seawater, oil and panic hung heavy in the air. The liner gave another violent shudder, and James felt his stomach drop. He turned his head toward the bow, his eyes widening in horror. The water was rising fast. A steward staggered past him shouting, "She's not grounded, we're slipping!" The realization hit James like a blow. The ship was not stuck. It was sliding off the shoal, its torn hull dragging it into deeper, merciless waters. The Drummond Castle was no longer a passenger liner. It was a sinking tomb. The liner tilted even more sharply, tearing James free from his grip on the rail and throwing him to the deck. Fellow voyagers wailed as they slid across the wet planks, grasping desperately for anything to hold on to. James clawed toward the base of the rail, intent on latching onto it again. The icy spray drenching him to the bone. Around him, the chaos was unrelenting. Cries of terror, the groaning of the hull as it was torn apart, and the rising roar of water surging into the bowels of the Drummond Castle. He turned to see a young woman he recalled seeing in the dining room, working as a governess for a wealthy family, clutching the railing not far from him, her knuckles white as she fought against the pull of gravity. James lunged toward her, grabbing her arm and steadying her as the deck shifted beneath them. "Hold on!" he shouted, though his words could barely cut through the explosion of noise around them. The stern of the Drummond Castle rose high into the air, silhouetted against the faint glow of the moon through the mist. There was an eerie stillness for a fleeting moment, a pause before the inevitable. Then came the final shuddering groan as she broke free of the underwater ridge and slipped beneath the waves. James was thrown into the freezing Atlantic, the shock of the cold like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. He gasped for air, fighting to keep his head above water as debris swirled around him. The cries of the drowning filled the night, mingling with the hiss of escaping steam and the hollow sound of splintering wood. Clinging to a floating plank, James scanned the water, his breath coming in ragged gulps. The young woman he had tried to help was nowhere to be seen. Only then did he realize the leather satchel he had so desperately clung to was gone, lost to the sea, along with his dreams of a second chance amidst the green hills of England. All that remained was survival, if the sea would allow it. The minutes dragged on like hours. Around him, the voices faded one by one, swallowed by the unforgiving Atlantic. James's strength ebbed with each wave that crashed over him. The cold crept into his bones, numbing his fingers as he clung to the wreckage with the last reserves of his will. As dawn broke, the faint outline of a fishing boat appeared on the horizon. Breton fishermen, drawn by the debris and the haunting silence, searched the waters for survivors. But for James, hope came too late. His grip faltered, and the sea claimed him, dragging him into its dark embrace. Soon the scale of the disaster began to reveal itself. The Breton fishermen, who had ventured out at first light, pulled 3 survivors from the frigid waters, 2 crewmen and a single passenger. But for the other 242 souls aboard, the sea had claimed them all. Bodies began washing ashore on the nearby islands of Molène and Ushant, carried by the same treacherous currents that had sealed the Drummond Castle's fate. Entire families lay side by side on the rocky beaches, their belongings scattered among the wreckage like ghostly reminders of lives abruptly cut short. The fishermen, overwhelmed by the sheer number of dead, began the grim task of burying the victims in common graves. There was no time to build coffins and no wood to construct proper resting places. The islands became makeshift cemeteries, marked only by the grief of those left behind, and the sobering reminder of nature's unyielding power. In London, news of the disaster spread like wildfire. The offices of the Castle Line in Fenchurch Street were besieged by crowds of distraught relatives desperate for news of loved ones. Inside, the staff worked tirelessly, but the news they shared was bleak. In Cape Town, the shock was no less profound. Parliament adjourned as a mark of respect for the dead, and businesses came to a standstill as communities mourned. In every town across South Africa, there were families grappling with the sudden and devastating loss of fathers, mothers, sons and daughters. The Drummond Castle disaster was a blow felt across 2 continents. The sorrow transcended borders, uniting people in mourning as they struggled to comprehend how a ship so close to completing its journey could vanish so quickly, taking almost everyone aboard with her. Yet, the grief was accompanied by anger, suspicion, and a litany of unanswered questions. Why had the Drummond Castle been navigating such a perilous route through the southern entrance of the Francois Sound, where the Pierre Vert's reef lurked just below the surface? Mariners of the time knew the Northern Passage to be safer and more forgiving. Was it an error in navigation? A miscalculation? Or was the captain attempting to save time and push forward despite the poor visibility? And what of Captain William Pearce himself? The survivors later recounted how he hesitated to issue evacuation orders, believing the ship was merely grounded on the rock formation. But how could such an experienced mariner misjudge the situation so gravely? Why had soundings, a standard practice in treacherous waters, been neglected entirely? These questions lingered long after the vessel disappeared beneath the waves. The Board of Trade Inquiry, held in Westminster just weeks after the disaster, sought answers. It ultimately concluded that the sinking was the result of careless or unskillful navigation, but many found this explanation unsatisfying. How could a ship so close to safety, so close to completing her journey, be lost so completely in a matter of minutes? The official inquiry closed the case, but it did little to quell the speculation or offer comfort to the grieving families. For those left behind, the unanswered questions became their own form of torment. What might have been avoided? What should have been done differently? These doubts offered no solace, only a lingering sense of what might have been. In 1929, more than 3 decades after the tragedy, the Italian salvage vessel Artiglio stumbled upon the wreck of the Drummond Castle while searching for bullion from another shipwreck, the P&O liner Egypt. Though the Artiglio eventually recovered the gold from the Egypt during a separate operation, the Drummond Castle offered no treasure. Instead, what they found was a haunting reminder of the disaster. The divers who descended into the dark depths found the hull severely damaged. A long gash stretching from the keel to the waterline, a grim testament to the violent encounter with the Pierre Vert's reef. The revelation confirmed the magnitude of the reef's power and the ship's vulnerability in the face of it. The discovery of Drummond Castle served no financial purpose, but it brought her story back into the public consciousness. For those who still remembered the tragedy, it was a solemn echo of a lives lost and a ship that never reached home. Once again, the sea proved it keeps its secrets well, but it never forgets its victims. The sinking of the SS Drummond Castle was a tragedy born of navigational error and the pitiless nature of the 7 seas. Within 4 minutes, 242 lives were lost, destined to bear the same mournful epitaph for all eternity. The sea is my grave. My grave is the sea. Thank you for watching. What do you think could have been done to prevent this disaster? Let us know in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you more harrowing tales of the sea. Until next time, let us honor all those who rest beneath the waves.